Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast. I am your host, Callahan, and today we will be answering the never-ending question, is Battle for Baldur's Gate the set that breaks cEDH? Today, my fellow Sculptybois Pongo and Ian, otherwise known as Comedian MTG, will be joining me to give their takes on the latest set for Magic the Gathering in this latest edition of our set review series. Before we dive into that discussion, however, I do want to take a moment to thank our patrons. Your support is what enables us to be able to continue the show and put on events like the MLC. One of the benefits of being a patron is access to our Discord server, where you can join our community for all sorts of discussions around spoilers, deck building, memes. You can join Squirrel Mob and I as we talk about sports, and as James bemoans how bad the Detroit Lions are. It really is a truly great community, and we would love to have you be a part of it. Also, starting this week, the show will be going back to audio only. I know some people really liked the video aspects of it, but it's just much more manageable to keep a consistent release schedule when audio is the main focus. However, as a bonus for our patrons, I am going to be releasing the uncut episodes of our recording sessions with video for you all to enjoy. So if you want to join the Sculpty family, head on over to patreon.com/the Mind Sculptors, and you could find out more information there. Also, don't forget to rate us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you review us on Apple Podcasts, I will make sure to give you a shout out in the next episode. Nobody left us a review last week, so come on, get on that, everyone. Oh, well, with that said, let's jump into my conversation with Ian and Pongo and answer the question, is Battle for Baldur's Gate the set that breaks cEDH? So before we get too deep into the set review, we have something we have to do. And that is our first segment of our show, which is going to be Dear Sculptybois. This is Ian, I know you're laughing, but this is a real patron perk.
I read it yesterday and it completely left my mind until today.
I didn't realize we were going to do it right away. I guess the response has been good.
So here is the question. Dear Sculptybois, some exposition before the question. cEDH has grown by leaps and bounds over the past few years, driven largely by a combination of significant online presence, acceptance of proxies or playtest cards to handle cost concerns by players, and numerous paths to easily play over the internet even prior to the creation of Spelltable. As we've seen this explosion of growth, so too have we seen a similar explosion in content. Deck text, physical pieces, gameplay videos, and even Twitter clout wars have dominated discussion, not just in cEDH circles, but often have even spread into more traditional EDH discourse. This places a significant pressure on cEDH content creators not only to develop their own brand, but also to speak for the whole of cEDH, whether that is their intention or not, as any cEDH content creator becomes a window for non-cEDH consumers into the world of cEDH. With that in mind, who has the best voice in cEDH? Like literally the nicest voice to listen to. And that's going to be from Sarah in Santa Fe, we'll say. So I guess we'll just, I think this is an easy answer personally.
I think there's two. I think there's one that might roll off our heads as people we know more, but
go ahead. I want to, you know what, Pongo, you go first.
Best voice. I mean, it depends. Because like I have some people in mind that maybe you won't all agree necessarily fit into this category.
Rattle some names.
But the first name that comes to mind when I think of somebody who you could consider a content creator of sorts is Kai.
Kai does have a great
does have a great voice. Yeah.
Go subscribe to their YouTube channel, Fervent Alchemist. Who are you thinking of, Ian?
I want to hear you say your one because I have a feeling I'm going to say yes.
It's
but
Sean.
Also,
it's Sean from from the Mystic Remoras. Easy.
That's another good one.
He's who did our voiceover. Yeah, he's who did our voiceover for the cEDH Awards. He's great. He has the silky smoothest. Is that how you say it? Silky smoothest. Very silky smooth. Whatever.
I thought you were going to get the other person and not get Sean.
Oh,
because Sean was my what I thought was my wild card. My other person's Higher.
Okay, yeah, that's a good one. Higher is a good one.
I've legitimately had long conversations with Higher about how he could literally make millions on ASMR. Like
Alex does have a great voice.
I legitimately have late night conversations been soothed to a slumbering state due to Alex's lovely tones.
So this is the official cEDH content creator tier list. You heard it here.
So it's Sean, Kai, and Higher or Alex from Playing with Power. I don't know what we're supposed to call him now that he's part of Playing with Power. Is it still Higher? Or is it?
I mean, he goes by both.
Okay. Listen, as the Mind Sculptors and Playing with Power both begin to consume cEDH.
It's like you've got two massive devouring, like all-consuming forces, like coming from opposite ends, and like everyone else is, in between, getting caught up, swallowed into either the Sculpty family or into Playing with Power.
I used to be over here, just a casual Star Wars, and then Disney had to go and buy me up. I get
it. You know what? I can actually make this reference now because there's going to be a Warhammer 40K set coming out. But it's like you've got the Tyranids on one side, and you've got the Necrons on the other side. And they're, we're just trying to assimilate or devour everything. So we'll see. I don't know.
Are we the Phyrexians or are we the Eldrazi?
I like to think we're the Gatewatch, but or the coalition. Like,
notice how I picked two villain factions. Peace was never an option.
I'm not like, you saw us in Seattle. We're a bunch of fucking degenerates. Like, no one looks at people like the three of us and Morgan and goes, "Yeah, the good guys are right there."
Too true.
Well, now that the villains of cEDH have arrived, we're going to, as the title of the video, implies, or the podcast, however you're listening to this on, on Spotify, we're going to answer the never-ending question: is Commander Legends, what's it called? Battle at Baldur's Gate? Is it Battle for Baldur's Gate?
I believe.
Is Commander Legends 2 the set that breaks cEDH?
Technically speaking, it's Commander Legends Dungeons and Dragons Battle for Baldur's Gate, if we're going by this pack I have here.
Commander Legends.
Could they have come up with...
Yeah.
The official set card thing is CLB. So Commander Legends Baldur's,
which I think could have been worse.
It could have been much worse. All right, so first card on our list is Archivist of Oghma. It is a colorless and a white creature, halfling cleric. That's a 2/2 with flash, and whenever an opponent searches their library, you gain 1 life and draw a card. So guys, I don't know. Is this good? Is this playable? I don't know. I can't tell.
It says draw a card on it. I've heard that's pretty good.
Oh, true. I didn't think about that part.
In all seriousness, this is like Esper Sentinel good.
I don't think it's that good, personally.
Ooh, I'm hard throwing down the red flag on that one. I do not know it's that good.
Callahan, that's strike one.
Okay. All right. So we've started a discussion. So tell me why I'm wrong. So what's going on here?
Pongo, do you want to start? Or
Well, I'll leave that conversation for you. How about that, Ian? I'll just go over, the stats that we've got here and what I like about this card. So obviously we're talking about 1 and a white for a 2/2, and it has flash, which is like really nice, actually, just to kind of randomly have on top of the meat of this card, which is whenever an opponent searches their library, you gain 1 life and draw a card. Turns out people in this format search their library pretty often between tutors and fetch lands and stuff like that. Yes. So this card actually ends up drawing a good amount of cards for only 2 mana. And you can also, you don't have to like play it out in advance at sorcery speed. So you can be representing interaction and then just flash this in when somebody cracks a fetch land or something. It's a play pattern that Callahan, as you will attest to,
I can tell you all about.
I've already done this many, many times on stream now because I've kind of just been keeping hands with this card to try it out.
I'll tell you from experience, when you crack a fetch against this card and somebody goes in response, your heart
people
drops.
People clench their butt.
Fast.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you immediately think you're getting op agented.
Yeah.
Oppo.
Even if it's mono white, you're still just sitting there going,
which is a good comparison point that I wanted to make. This card I don't believe is as good as Opposition Agent.
Oh, no. I don't think
well, mainly because Opposition Agent is just so backbreaking for so many decks to have to play through. Well, it kind of just you can't play through it.
Because Opposition Agent draws a card, right? But it also is a stats piece, right? That's kind of
if you can pull off Opposition Agent, drawing a card, sure. But you're also happy to just slam Opposition Agent, even if people aren't tutoring, because you know that it's going to be disruptive as a stacks piece. Whereas this, you really need to get value off of it for it to be doing anything. Otherwise, it's just a 2/2, and it's not stopping your opponents from tutoring most of the time. And short of them playing very particular decks that literally have like a tutor in the command zone, as we saw on stream last night or 2 nights ago, Callahan, where Sick was playing Rocco and was very threatened by the Oghma. But yeah, so I mean, I've played around with the card, and I think for just 2 mana, I've been consistently drawing like 2-3 cards a game. And gaining, 2-3 life off of it, which for 2 mana is, where I want a card to be more or less, at sort of at minimum.
It's a body,
which has additional upside in the types of decks you're going to want to play it in. Right. So I don't believe that I don't personally believe that it's a slam dunk in every deck that could possibly play it. Notably, Thrasios and Tymna decks, as we were talking about the other night as well, are frequently going to run into an issue where the forced draw aspect of this card, making it like a second Esper Sentinel of sorts.
Yeah,
it can kill you if your win condition is consistently just Oracle, right? And that happens to be the case for most Thrasios Tymna decks. So it can actually be awkward to play through it. I played in Najeela. Yeah. And that deck is just happy to play like really efficient card advantage engines, at 2 mana ideally. And then, something that I can neoform later is additional upside, or I can attack with it, additional upside.
So here's the thing. I think if you are playing this card expecting it to be that use case that we were just talking about there, and the 2 to 3 cards, like a 2 mana flash that draws 2 draws 3 over the course of several turns, that is something that is a cEDH staple, right? Like, I think that is pretty easy to... No one's doubting that this card is playable, or even that it is on the better side of playable cards. In low color decks, I think this card's a slam dunk. Like, I think you play this a ton in any white X decks, especially in like the 2-3 color department. I think there's a lot of cases where you play it. Maybe, when you add black or blue, like there's definitely some decks where you start to question
it's better than... it's certainly higher than like the 50th percentile of cEDH cards. Yeah.
I totally agree. Yes, that is a very good way of putting it. But the fact that, first of all, casting non-creatures in comparison to tutoring is I don't think those are even comparable quantifiers there, right? Like if you think about how many non-creature spells are cast in an average game of cEDH, like it's a comical amount, and many so like you're never going to end up in a scenario in which someone tutors and then never, but like for Esper Sentinel, right? Like some of the scenarios in which it pops off are like you're having a counter fight, right? In the mid to late game, or even in the early game with some more aggressive decks, and player A attempts to cast a proactive spell. Player B goes to counter that proactive spell, and it's still in the early game, so no one has the extra 1 mana. And then player C finally has the third counter spell that gets them over the top, right? That's 3 cards for Esper Sentinel in that scenario. There are not going to be scenarios in which you're like, player A goes to cast the Demonic Tutor, player B goes to crack the fetch land, player C goes to crack the fetch land. Those are things that can happen, but it's not going to line up in the same way, and it's not going to have the dividends in the same way. Esper Sentinel can be paid for. It's more of a tempo play in that sense. So like if you're treating Esper Sentinel like a Thaliel, right? Like that's very interesting. That's not how I ever see it play, but
I mean, Callahan.
I don't know.
We see it a lot.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Our Ristic studies and our Esper Sentinels don't draw cards.
You play in the grindiest.
I know I play in the grindiest. It makes me the most responsible Magic player. And it's
but
terrible.
The amount of players in the open meta that are just head down, face forward, right? Like
the amount of time I'm looking at my Ristic study and I'm like, I thought this was a good card. What's happening?
So the one thing I will say is when I say that I evaluate it on the same as being the same as like Esper Sentinel is because when we did our Modern Horizons set review, I said this thing where Esper Sentinel is Mystic Remora, and it's in the same class of cards as Mystic Remora, Ristic Study, those types of effects. And, Mystic Remora's preordains, Ristic Studies, all those different cards that go in when I'm dropping cards into my bucket to build a deck. And then I take them out as I'm trimming the fat off the deck, if that makes sense. Like Preordain doesn't always make my deck, or Ponder doesn't always make your deck, or Git Probe doesn't always make your deck, but it's definitely in the first draft of a lot of my decks. In the initial dropping in of cards. And that's kind of where I see this card is where it's like, it probably won't make the cut in several decks, but it's certainly going to be seeing play, and it's a generically good card.
One also word of caution for people that I think keeps, because it is so comparable to Opposition Agent and Aven Mind Sensor, I've heard the word Hate Bearer used to refer to this card. It literally does nothing to stop what your opponents are doing. It's a suggestive stacks piece. I see it as like,
as Charles
it's a suggestive,
say.
Exactly. Much like Remora, much like Ristic Study. It reminds me more of a non-color specific compost than something like Athalia, right? So I think it's just something to note when people are evaluating this card. Is like you cannot look at it like it's a stacks piece, because it isn't.
Well, on to the next card. Battle Angels of Tyr. It is an Angel Knight that is a 4/4 that costs 2 colorless and 2 white, and has flying and myriad. And whenever Battle Angels of Tyr deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. If that player has more cards in hand than each other player. Then you create a treasure token if that player controls more lands than each other player. Then you gain 3 life if that player has more life than each other player. That has a lot of text on it. So first of all, Myriad is an on-attack ability that makes a copy for how many opponents you have?
For each unattacked opponent, yeah.
There you go. That's what Myriad does. So, Ian, what is it specifically about this card that you really like that, is worth mentioning?
And why is it draw a card?
It's so for me, it's while yes, draw a card is like kind of popped on, like it's very good, right? So you are going to get, unless I'm misreading this card, you're going to get each of those things, right?
No.
Oh, no, you're not, because it's each other player. There's another card in the set that says each opponent, but it's not this one. anyways, side note. But so unless you have the most cards in hand, and if you're playing a low color white deck, you won't, unless you have the most lands, and depending on specifically the deck, that's a maybe. And then the life doesn't really matter, but like also it might if you're playing a long drawn out game. The point is, it is 4 mana for 12 evasive power every single turn. That sometimes also grants you card advantage and sometimes also grants you mana advantage.
Yeah.
And the context for this that I think is very important here is I am not talking about this card for a 4-color deck. I'm not talking about, that has a little asterisk next to it, right? I hate speaking in absolutes. But
Fair.
this is a low colored stacks card, right? I have been working I've been working a reasonable amount on perfecting Giada, the Streets of New Capenna commander, and then obviously this is like a snap include in there.
Right.
But I think just as a stacks finisher in any white deck, especially the monocolored white decks that are using things like Archon of Myriad, the amount of generated value you can get from this 4 mana investment, it will win you the game. It is a very efficiently costed, like 4 mana for an evasive flyer that turns into 12 damage worth of pressure every single turn is a solid return on investment. And if it replaces itself, if not does more, I think this is a really solid finisher. And it's one of those things. It's like, this is a pushed casual card. And because it's a pushed casual card in a stacks deck, it's a great finisher.
It's true.
Yeah, I find it funny that they put that last line of text on it where you gain 3 life if that player has more life than each other player. Meanwhile, you're like crushing the table. You like never gain that life.
Yeah.
That's like, they decided that like one of these modes is just like never happening. And it was that one, which is, it's kind of funny. Anyway, you said that as the mono white deck, frequently you're going to have fewer cards in hand. And that wasn't always my experience. Because what actually ends up happening a lot of the time is you tend to be playing a considerably higher curve than a lot of the other decks. And you also tend to be playing less acceleration and less explosive cards in general than a lot of the other decks. So it was not unusual for me to find that after getting like maybe a trigger off this card and drawing a card, that I was sort of no longer drawing cards off of it. Because people had more or less emptied their hands and I was not able to deploy cards quite as fast. Pretty consistently getting the treasure though. Yeah. So like, the value proposition is there. But I think that for 4 mana, if all I was doing was like inconsistently drawing a card and like inconsistently getting a treasure, I would actually be much less excited about this. When you look at the whole package, as you so eloquently put. Right. So yes. Yeah, I think that it's really the comparison with Tendershoe Dryad is an interesting one. I think it's less powerful as a beat stick, but you do have to obviously look at the fact that it is going to give you treasures pretty consistently and draw a card. I think at least one card most of the time.
Yeah.
Next card on our list is Deep Gnome Terramancer. That is a 2/2 gnome wizard that costs 1 colorless and a white, that has flash, and whenever 1 or more lands enter the battlefield under an opponent's control without being played, you may search your library for a plains card, put it onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle, and you can only do this once each turn. So this is basically something you play in response to somebody's fetch.
It's like, but this isn't modern, I think that's like really a thing we're missing with this card, is that there are only a certain amount of fetch lands in every cEDH deck, and no one's playing Nature's Lore. No one's playing 3 visits except for me and Brayden and Paco, right? Like, and
like the 2 people that are playing Tatiova, like.
Yeah, right, exactly, and that's my biggest qualm with this card is like I would actually put money on the table that there are more games where this doesn't trigger than games where it does.
Yeah, and it has to trigger more than one time to actually be good by my estimation, because otherwise you might as well just be playing like Loyal Warhound, or you know what I mean, like 2 mana if an opponent has, or Knight of the White Orchid. Right? Like if you can handle the white,
this,
absolutely.
This having Just having flash, though, I think it's very like
it's certainly upside.
And it also gets any planes card, right? So like this gets you your duel. This gets you, this can color fix you, which is why in a deck like why I would consider it. I'm not saying I would play it, but I would at the minimum consider it because it's one reactive, which is exactly what that deck is all about, right? And, Arden Crom is very much a reactive deck. This on surface level fits into that as something that's worth looking into because it can potentially help you fix your mana, which that deck regularly runs into.
Like even in Winota, where this is a flash non-human, I cannot see myself playing this.
Well, you don't play a whole lot of planes, though, do you?
We have like 6.
That's a lot. Yeah, I think
Sacred Foundry.
Okay.
Yeah.
For me, like if I'm playing 5 planes, I could probably consider I could justify this card. 5+.
Right, but that's and on top of Sacred Foundry and Plateau.
And
right?
I'm not talking about basic planes. I'm talking about just 5 planes cards, right? Like
yeah. Right, super fair. I don't know. Maybe I am underestimating the amount of fetch lands, but like
I see tons of
fetch lands. It comes down early enough that I do think it nabs a few fetch lands, but
that's the thing, right? Is it's 2 mana, so you can play this as early as turn 1.
It does need to get 2 fetch lands though to like really, and it needs to do that consistently. Otherwise, like give me Arcane Signet,
Yeah. I will also say I have the biased Winota perspective here, where I think the burden of cards in Winota to immediately put pressure on the board and like do things is a little higher than like some of the more grind.
Yeah.
It's not evasive, right? Either, and it's not a stacks piece. Like
Yeah. Right. Like even Goldhound, which seems like a snap include for Winota, is like a card that it just isn't making the cut right now. And that's kind of indicative of like the pressure of cards.
Yeah, they need to have evasion or haste or impact the board.
Right.
Which this doesn't do any of those things. So I understand.
Exactly.
Completely.
So the next card on our list is, am I reading that right? Paradox Engine? No. It's Displacer Kitten. Displacer Kitten is a 2/2 cat beast that costs 3 colorless in a blue and says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, exile up to 1 target non-land permanent you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So obviously,
shout out.
This is Paradoxical Kitty.
Shout out to Ken of Stacked EDH who called it Paradox Engine.
Oh, that's beautiful. So
always count on Ken.
When we look at this card, we've Pongo and I have had personal experience playing against this card. It's very gross against something like Muldrotha. That was the most disgusting thing I've ever seen in my life. Where you get this down with Muldrotha
with a Lion's Eye Diamond or a Lotus Petal,
Petal, and you just cast it from your graveyard, bounce your Muldrotha, cast it again from your graveyard, bounce Muldrotha. Or
it's a new Muldrotha, so you can just keep making mana and flickering Muldrotha.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's very gross.
I think, sorry to interrupt you, Callahan. I'm just going to say, this is my hot take for the night. And you know me, my hot takes are incredibly cold. But I think that this is, for me, the best card in the set. That
is the coldest take I've ever heard.
My hot takes are always really cold. I think this is the best card in the set. I mean, some people will probably think that it's Archivist of Oghma, which probably is, maybe more generically good. But this card, it's just so layered. Like, you know what I mean? It does so many different interesting things in so many different places.
Yeah.
And it's just going to continue to get more broken with time.
So just to, I want to give some clarity here. So earlier in our Discord, somebody posted a screenshot from somebody whose take on this card was basically, it's a 4-drop. And so you've got to have 4 mana plus another thing to do. And, it's, Notion Thief isn't that playable. and it has flash and all of these things. And Cobblepot and Phoenix are in here going, these are the exact same arguments people made about Paradox Engine when that card came out, and it got banned. So
this is not as good as Paradox Engine.
It's not as good as Paradox Engine.
Right. But it's also not as easy to counter as Paradox
Yes.
Engine, I will say.
It's also easier to tutor than Paradox Engine.
Yeah.
You can get it off either recruiter.
It depends on the color. It depends on the colors, right? If you're in green, then this is the easiest Paradox Engine to tutor.
Well, I mean,
but
like, so it's as easy to tutor if you're playing black, one or the other, right? But then most of the time you're adding on green.
Sure.
So like, yeah.
This card is very good a lot of the time, right? So here's just an example play that I like to talk about. Turn 1, you play a land and a mana vault. Turn 2, you play, turn 2, you play another land, you play your kitty, and you play a 1 mana spell. Boop. Oh, hey, I got that fun little mana vault back. That's weird. Yeah. That's just like a super medium case for this card, right? I think there are a lot of scenarios where you're going to put this in the field.
Yeah, there you go. It's like mana vault's thinking too small.
Right? Like, yeah. Right. But I'm saying like mana vault's like a thing that we're not like, oh God, it's mana vault. We're all going to die. But like mana vault's a really damn good card, right? This with the soul ring, this with the mana crypt.
So many things. Yeah.
The fact that so my
Eternal
big
Witness,
place for this, I kind of had a hot take last set with not last set, sorry, in Neon Dynasty, where I said that reality chip is a reason, or is maybe like the first reason to play a non Proteus staff or polymorph version of Urza. I think this is the second reason, and I was already really high on reality chip in Urza. So the fact that this with Urza just becomes cast a non-creature, immediately get refunded, at minimum a thing that taps for another blue mana and make a construct every time that you're casting a spell, that's just insane. And then, you know, there's so much upward potential if you're playing a deck that like I think there is room for this with like a Sakashima style deck where you can guarantee that you have a second copy of this card, and that just goes like buck wild. There is so much potential to this card is my point.
This card, I think, puts Joyra back into a position where, if you remember, before Paradox Engine was banned, Joyra was like quite playable. And
then it became
dead. Because it just you would die so many times because you would just run out of gas.
Yeah.
Right.
This,
I will say, Bergie was a really big.
It was a big,
and I think Bergie does a little more than this card.
I think the combination of the two makes up for losing Paradox Engine.
Right.
Because now you're like, okay, like this being able to reset your mana vault or your Grim Monolith, like that's what's important here. That's where Bergie can't compete with this card in Joyra, because it being able to like as somebody who I was dedicated before Lavinia. I was a very dedicated Joyra player. And
I didn't know this.
The way you would get Steam was, I remember there was a game where I was hellbent. I top decked a mana vault with a Paradox Engine out, and then I proceeded to win the game. Like that was literally the course of events. Was I won the game because I top decked a card for 1 mana that drew me a card
because of Paradox Engine.
Because Paradox Engine. This is going to end up doing the exact same thing, and it's because what that deck ends up needing is it needs to float enormous amounts of mana to be able to really get things moving. And if you're able to just tap down your Grim Monolith, like honestly, I think you could, like, Phantasmal Image, Sakashima, Phyrexian Metamorph. Phyrexian Metamorph 100% am considering in Joyra now. Sakashima, I'm almost 100% considering now, because it's a draw off Joyra and could double Joyra or could double Kitty. Like, the amount of stuff that this opens up for that deck alone makes me really happy.
It's also does stuff with Birthing Pod, just kind of like coincidentally, right? Like, I mean, you need to have the non-creature spells,
Wait,
right?
really?
But like you can chain, for example.
It
flickers pod. Yeah.
Oh,
if you
that's
have the
dumb.
non-creature spells in hand. But you know, there has to be chains, right? Where, you know, you're just chaining through like Spellseeker or chaining through, or, you know, other things like Eternal Witness, but potentially making sure that you put those cards in hand with other untappers and stuff like that. Like, or, you know, just have one non-creature spell in hand. It's not that hard.
I also think that this card is like, the thing that's really unique is that Paradox Engine with Mana Rocks, right, was always a really solid value case, right? But only with Mana Rocks. And I think Pongo bringing up Eternal Witness earlier, cards like Skyclave Apparition, what we talked about with Dockside, Spellseeker, right? Like these cards that are like fucking insane, and cards that, like, if you get a second copy of them, you're like, oh dear God, right? Like I think it also hits your own Gilded Drakes, right? To like get them back. Isn't someone said that the other day?
You have to control
non-land
it.
permanent. You control. You have to control. It's not own. It's not Sword of Home and Hearth.
Hearth and Home,
or Hearth and Home. It's not quite that.
Yeah, it flickers your Stoneforge Mystic.
Yes. Oh man.
But like the fact that, like, I mean, that case, right? So like the case of being able to flicker a Skyclave Apparition over and over again in a bad scenario where you're not like winning with this card is kind of just wild. Like the Jorah Dockside thing, or like any of the Dockside stuff with this card, it's obviously insane. But the fact that it has utility outside of like the typical Paradox Engine space, and the fact that there weren't a lot of cEDH cards that were like tap draw card, except for with Thrasios and Urza, right? But the fact that you can have cards that have ETB draw card effects with this card, and instead of it being the mana half, or you can even alternate between it being the mana half and the draw card half, and the mana half and the draw card half, right? That it has so much flexibility, and I think that's really where this card shines.
You know what's so tragic is this, you can't play this in Captain Sisse is the real travesty of this, actually.
I was literally thinking about this with Emery. I was like, okay, so you start playing all these bad haste outlets like Lightning Greaves, and then your Emery can just pop off with the kitten every turn. And I was like, Ian, I think you're doing some hard believing here.
Next card on our list is Aboleth Spawn. It is a 2/3 fish horror that costs 2 colorless and a blue. It has Flash, Ward 2. Whenever a creature entering the battlefield under an opponent's control causes a triggered ability of that creature to trigger, you may copy that ability. You may choose new targets for the copy.
It's a trap. It's a trap.
You know what? I think that's kind of racist because it's a fish, and Admiral Admar is a fish person.
It would actually be speciesist, but you know, keep doing you, Cal.
Wow, I hadn't even considered that, but you're right. I guess I'll resign right now.
Pongo's canceled.
In disgrace.
The next card on our list is am I saying this right? Burakos. My dumb Christian brain wants to call it Barabbas.
It's Burakos, right?
Yeah, Burakos.
Oh yeah,
is like how I originally was thinking, but Burakos. Party Leader is a 2/4 legendary orc that costs 3 colorless and a black. That says when it is also a cleric, rogue, warrior, and it's also a warrior. Oh shoot!
Yeah, I was waiting for this.
Whenever it attacks, defending player loses X life, and you create X treasure tokens, where X is the number of creatures in your party. And you can choose a background, which is like
Callahan. You know what that looks like? Yeah.
Is this an on fire garbage can, or is this a Najeela?
Is this card? A Najeela win con question mark? Yeah.
So what are our thoughts on this card, Pongo?
Okay. Well, first of all, just to nip this one in the bud. No, it's not a Najeela card. Yeah, that's too bad. For 4 mana and the fact that it has to attack, I think is actually probably the biggest thing, the biggest strike against it. If it didn't have to attack and instead it was templated like when you attack and you do the thing, then maybe I would actually be considering it. But we don't live in that world. It doesn't do that. So whatever. As far as the card itself, I think it's actually pretty powerful as a commander. That ability is actually pretty strong where defending players. So you're going to try to attack each opponent, right? And so you have each player ideally lose 4 life in addition to whatever damage they're taking from combat. And then you're making ideally 4 treasures if you built your deck correctly for attacking. Which is pretty strong. As we know, Dockside Extortion is a famously good card.
I did find it kind of lame that it's in the commander deck with the background that also just happens.
Well, that's how they all are. Yeah.
Like
all of these.
And like I know that's a very small.
Yeah, all these backgrounds
gripe,
are really designed to go with the choose a background commander and to synergize strongly with them. But I know what you're saying. It's hard to imagine wanting to pick too many more of the other backgrounds, but I think actually Burakos is an exception where I could see myself theoretically building this, not just as black-white, although black-white is a really strong direction to go with him specifically. It's so tempting because that background is really powerful.
Yeah.
And because white actually really helps you fill out party really nicely.
And it helps the speed of this card, right? Like thinking about like curving like a Drannith Magistrate into a Archon of Myria into this card, and then like at minimum making you
do want to be playing stacks really to realize the value proposal, and both in terms of the life loss and in terms of the treasure creation. But theoretically you could play this as like a black-red commander too. I think he's interesting. He's not going to massively shake up the format or anything like that. But if somebody pulled up at a table with a Burakos, either in Orzhov or in Rakdos, I'd be like, okay, yeah, this is a cool deck. And, if you get enough time or you get the right opening hand, I'm sure you will do some powerful things.
Y'all need to go check your Twitter because I tagged you guys in a post. You already noted it, but you need to check it.
Now, Cal, if you don't put this picture in the YouTube video, because you have a habit of saying, I'm going to put this picture in the YouTube video, and then being like, you're like, right now, I'll put up a graphic of 6 ducks, and they're all having a sword fight. And in the middle is a picture of Pongo holding the Gila, and I'm going to be sitting there staring at our cold, dead faces, being like, where are the fucking ducks, Cal?
Where are my ducks?
Where are my ducks?
I was promised the ducks.
Well, my black market connections have them.
Wow.
Which coincidentally is our next card on the list.
Consummate professional.
Black market connections is 2 colorless and a black enchantment. It says at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, choose 1 or more. The first ability is create a treasure token. You lose 1 life. The second one is draw a card. You lose 2 life. And the third one is create a 3/2 colorless shapeshifter creature token with changeling. You lose 3 life. Okay. So again, Pongo, is this is an on fire garbage can? Could be an Agila card.
You have a problem.
What I mean,
you have an actual problem, Cal.
We've talked about it. So at minimum, you're basically getting easier to cast Phyrexian Arena because you can draw a card not on your upkeep, your pre-combat main phase, but anyway. Additionally, you can make a treasure token. So we're just talking about like strictly better Phyrexian Arena. And Phyrexian Arena, does have some history in the format. If you go far back enough, by today's standards, not nearly good enough. And then, kind of the last ability here, which actually for Nagila specifically is kind of interesting, is you can make a 3/2 colorless shapeshifter creature token that also happens to be a warrior because of changeling. So, if you're willing to pay 6 mana, you can make a treasure, you can draw a card, and you can make a warrior. Problem is that it's 3 mana, you have to wait, and then to realize the value from the warrior, you have to wait an extra turn because you have to wait for it to no longer be summoning sick. So that whole part is really, a bit of a pipe dream.
Yeah.
But, is this good enough as a card that makes a treasure and draws a card each turn for 3 mana? Maybe. I don't think it makes the cut in like 4+ colors. Again, just the power level of the card pool once you get into that many colors. But, this seems powerful enough potentially for lower color decks. And, it could be one that maybe I'm wrong about, maybe tacking on the fact that it makes a treasure pushes it over the top. But I'm skeptical.
I also think like we have a habit of just assuming if you're playing the color black, you're playing ad nauseum in our format.
It's another big issue.
Right. But that being said, I think that there are some grindier decks in the format, like your Timna Tana style decks that are like, I'd pay 4 life to make a creature and draw a card.
5 life.
Oh, 5.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. The treasure is the 1 life one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But okay. I pay 5 life to make a dude and draw a card.
Yeah. If I'm not on Nas, I'm pretty okay doing that, I think, depending on that deck.
And the card's not bad for sure. The card's not bad at all. And I think that I think it's just slow is the problem. But it's slow, but it's bonkers what it does, right? Like that's the thing. Like if you have the luxury of time, this card's insane.
Here's my hot take. So, and my hot takes are famously hot. So strap on.
Yeah, it's true.
So I think this is closer to Sylvan Library than it is.
I was gonna say the
Phyrexian Arena.
same thing.
God, this is why I love you, Ian.
I don't think that's a hot take.
It reminds me a lot of
it's strictly better than Phyrexian Arena.
Sylvan Library is, I feel like, about as fast as this is. And I think this gives you, for less life, a little bit more value. Like, depending on the deck you're playing. But I think if you would consider playing Sylvan Library in your deck, you would also consider playing this. I'm not saying they're both going to make the cut, but there's a lot of decks where Sylvan Library doesn't always make the cut, right? Like, I think this is, again, kind of, in my opinion, very similar to Archivist of Oghma, where it's that same class of card as Sylvan Library, where it's going to be in my initial cut of a lot of decks. Like, I'm throwing everything that I'm going to consider into this bucket in Moxfield, and then I'm going to start pulling stuff
it's like
out.
The 110th
this will be one
card is like what you're saying.
Yeah. And so, like, does it always make it to 100? No, but there will be decks where, like, Greasefang, I think, is a great example of this. Like, this is just straight up Sylvan Library in a deck like Greasefang. Right?
I think that the comparison with Sylvan Library is interesting, but I think that it kind of downplays the massive difference between 2 and 3 mana. Sylvan Library, a lot of the time, it's so powerful because you go land, Mox Diamond, pitch a land, play Sylvan Library. And like that's a really powerful play. You can do it with a Chromox too. For this card, you really need to have like basically specifically Mana Crypt or like a Dark Ritual. And like, probably you're not playing this in your Dark Ritual deck. And because if you're playing a Dark Ritual deck, I think you'd probably sooner just play like Necropotence over this card. Like if that's sort of the plan. So like, I think that if this was 2 mana and it didn't have the higher mercenary mode, it was just like, like lose 3 life, make a treasure, draw an extra card. I probably would play this over Sylvan Library at that point, like in a good amount of decks. Maybe that's crazy, but like 3 mana, like 3 life instead of 4, draw an extra card and not have the option to draw an additional extra card for 4 life, but I also get a treasure. Like that, I don't know. I think that's a card that I would be pretty happy to play.
I can't imagine a world where like Timna Armix or Timna Arden or Timna Tevish or Greasefang or insert Orzhov deck here is not interested in this.
I mean, it interferes on the curve with Tymna like a lot, right? So like, when do you play? I
mean,
this?
it's mana crypt land this, right? Like it's.
I mean, if you have specifically that.
If we're gonna make that argument, I feel like you can make a similar argument about Rhystic Study. And I get that Rhystic Study has a lot more long-term value, but like there was a point in time where people were saying like 3 mana was too much for Rhystic Study. Like, remember that hellscape that we were in at the beginning of the pandemic where people weren't playing Rhystic Study?
We don't talk about the dark times.
Like, we don't talk about the dark times. I think in grindy decks that are low color, specifically Orzhov, this is going to be a slam dunk.
Yeah, I don't think that's such a high bar to clear, for sure, for lower color decks.
Next card on our list is first red card on our list, which is Street Urchin, which is also conveniently the second commander on our list. It is a legendary background, which is an enchantment that costs 1 colorless and a red. And it says commander creatures you own have 1. You pay 1 colorless, sacrifice another creature or an artifact. This creature deals 1 damage to any target. So there's a couple things here. There's one of the things that I think is really cool with these backgrounds is so they don't do anything unless your commander is out, right? The one thing that's nice is if it's in your command zone, it does turn on your Fierce Guardianships, your deflecting swats.
Wait, really?
Yep.
Yeah, it counts as your commander.
If it's in the command zone.
I did not know that.
Yeah. If this is in your command zone, this turns those things on.
Very interesting. I did not hear about that.
So even if you don't have anything going on and you're playing this card, right? You're playing Street Urchin and you have it paired with something blue. You just play this out and you have Fierce or Deflecting Swat in your hand, and you can you have that now, regardless of whether this card is doing anything. It's now turned that on. It's very much like Rograck in that respect.
Yes.
Where Rograck kind of doesn't do anything on its own.
With Mox Amber and all the other stuff, yeah.
But right, with all these other things, it kind of turns stuff on. That's kind of similar to how these backgrounds work. Like, what is our feeling on this? Like, we have in our show notes, this is probably the best background out of all of them. But like, Pongo, where do you land on this card? Like
maybe as like the best sort of generic backgrounds. I'd have to like think about that statement a little bit more. I think there are certain backgrounds that maybe are stronger with specific pairings. But yeah, certainly that, this is a very, very powerful, I think even just generic background, or I should say it is a very powerful generic background. Mainly because, any background commander now kind of just has an outlet for Dockside Extortionist loops, where he can make infinite treasures, make infinite mana, and then start sacrificing them for damage. So yeah, great. You know what I mean? Like, we've got a direction for every background commander conceivably.
I'm a big fan of this card with specifically having a Dockside outlet on top of like a green commander, specifically for Guardian Hulk, right? Now, obviously, it's not like having something like Brawls because you have to pay mana into it.
Right.
But it definitely could be a lot worse. Like a green does not get let's talk about like this season of the MLC, right? We saw what happened with all the Gruul commanders. So like,
yeah, none of them got drafted.
Like, honestly, I was just like quickly scryfalling like what the rest of the green outlets are. And I kind of like the idea of just playing this with the crappy bear, just because of the fact that it's a 2-drop, right?
Wilson the Street Urchin.
Oh, that's such a cute. This little bear just like scratching around money.
I mean, literally any of the backgrounds like with Wilson are hilarious when you think about them.
Yes,
because it's just a bear that can be like a dragon cultist, or like a bear that can be
or a master.
Yeah, like, it just makes no sense. So I love that card exists.
This also with a card we're going to talk about later is something I'm very excited about, and I'll leave.
I mean, I think it's
Wonder
it's
what
very,
we're
very
gonna
strong generically, just to as a background, and then obviously has like some very, very specific, more niche interactions, but also happens to have like a really gross combination with what's probably one of the most problematic commanders in casual right now.
Well, speaking of the next red card on that is fun or whatever, is Wild Magic Surge. It is an instant that costs 2 red, and it says destroy target permanent and opponent controls. Its controller reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a permanent card that shares a card type with that permanent. They put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of their library in a random order. So this definitely shares some amount of stuff. Like, it's similar enough to Chaos Warp, right?
I don't think it's quite that clear cut. Mainly because this polymorphs whatever it hits, right? Like Chaos Warp, it's so unlikely that they're just going to flip back into the thing that you Chaos Warp.
I love this card.
So you love this card.
I do. I do love it so much. The thing is, right? So look, when you're playing mono red in cEDH, or even Rakdos in cEDH, you have this sort of thing that like a lot of the Krark players have, where they go, you live by the coin, you die by the coin. This is like, you live by the mountain, you die by the mountain, right? And this is just that. Sometimes red decks, like the non-Magda red decks, really struggle to like hit an enchantment or nuke an enchantment. And just the idea that like, I have this removal spell that says, how dare you question the power of mono red? like they're like, oh yeah, this whatever, this rule of law traditionally is gonna stop whatever they're doing in this deck, and you're like, excuse me, tap 2 mountains, suck it.
If you're using this to hit an enchantment, like that can really, really be scary. There's a lot of really powerful enchantments in the format.
It's just, I don't know, it's first of all,
crossed.
it's like it's like the traditional red card, right? Like it is flavorfully like the awesome, like so red. It works so well. It's much more efficient than Chaos War because of the 2 mana cost. I play a lot in the mono, or I guess I brew a lot in the mono red Rakdos space, because that's like I took one of those personality quizzes and I had like 33% red compared to any other color, right? So like for me, that this is my drug of choice, and so like the fact that like red just has another option that is so traditionally red and gives more flexibility to be a competitive color. I love that, especially in the lower colors.
My only gripe with the card is that I wish it didn't say an opponent controls and you could point it at your own stuff.
Pongo. Okay. You and Nathan said this shit on Twitter, and I was like, this would literally be the best polymorph ever printed.
Yes, I know. Obviously you can't do that, but like
a comical amount.
Yeah. Obviously you couldn't print it that way, but like,
I'm on the same boat, right? But like it would legitimately be like disproportionate amounts of leaps and bounds better than anything they've ever printed, right? Like, so
certainly.
Yeah. I just gotta say, like, as we're recording this, Ian, that like you have Pongo and I who have backgrounds and are wearing like full clothing.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's you with like your college dorm room,
and well, I just got back from Richmond.
I'm wearing pajamas. It's 10:30. Listen, I hope that this is true for all of us, but I'm willing to put myself out on a line and be the only person and look like a fool here. I'm not wearing pants. It's 10:30. You think I'm wearing pants?
I have been to many a recording without pants.
I love you, buddy.
No, I get it. I give off a certain, energy.
I'm wearing the weebiest possible shirt.
Is that a Naruto shirt?
Yeah.
Dr. Pongo, everybody. Dr. Jesse.
Working on it. Yeah, we're getting there. Making some big steps.
Wow, there's going to be 2 doctors in the
I know.
Sculptors. What is this, a fucking professional? Yeah, we can't be the good guys, right? Like,
oh no, we're definitely evil doctors.
There's a bunch of doctors.
Yeah.
Pongo, unfortunately, isn't becoming he is becoming a master, but unfortunately not in the types of things that we want him to be a master in, which is like cooking. So unfortunately, his background is not becoming a master chef, which is coincidentally the next card on our list. It is a.
You can't actually hit us with this. You can't actually just expect me to be
that
okay
one
with what
was-
you've
that
just
one
done.
was like a stretch.
Yeah.
That one was painful. Yeah.
I took you on a journey.
The last one was smooth as silk. This one was like a bumpy road.
My flight to Richmond was less of a journey than that.
Oh boy.
And I had my goddamn flight canceled.
Y'all are crazy. Anyhow, Master Chef is 2 colorless and a green. And it says commander creatures you own have this creature enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. And other creatures you control enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on them. So any background commander is now a persist combo.
Yep. That's it. That's about it.
It doesn't matter what commander, it just combos with persist.
I'm just sad that you can't play this card in Asmarano Markadiced in a Kuldakar, because that would be a flavor win.
Yes.
That was just the, I had to throw out the name there.
Yeah, to flex that you could actually
exactly.
do that. Yeah.
So Gale Waterdeep Prodigy is the next commander on our list. It is a 1/3 human wizard with that costs 2 colorless and a blue. And the ability says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand, you may cast up to 1 target card of the other type from your graveyard. If a spell cast from your graveyard this way would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. And most people are talking about this in combination with the black background Scion of Halaster, which is 1 colorless and a black. That says commander creatures you own have the first time you would draw a card each turn. Instead, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your graveyard and the other back on top of your library, then draw a card. So obviously the idea is that one fuels the other. So Ian, you said that Gale was, and I quote, gas.
No, Ian said it was pushed.
Oh, that's right.
I did.
It was, and I quote, pushed.
Yes.
So please elaborate for the class.
Look, I see this card and I'm not like, oh God, the heavens are falling. But like the fact
You do still have to
that-
pay mana for the cards, right? Like if you didn't, then it would be stupid.
And that's totally right. But the fact that like I can go, okay, on Cal's turn, I'm going to cast a Consider or an Opt, and then I'm going to cast my Demonic Tutor that's in my graveyard, right? That's where so the part where I think this card is kind of really cool is that, and the reason that it's different than Kess is that I was looking at Lear, which was in one of the new Innistrad blocks. And Lear does some really dumb stuff with intuition, right? Mm-hmm. But because of the upfront cost of that card, in addition to the fact that the card is just like the fact that you can no longer counter spells, right? All of these things, you lose so much utility with that ability.
So you're talking about this as like a high tide commander.
And not even in the sense of like high tide particularly, but in the fact that your graveyard becomes an extension of your hand, right? So casting a card like Frantic Search in this deck is just like bonkers, right? Like if you're able to bin 2 relevant spells in your graveyard while you have your commander in the battlefield and then just start like storming off, or like even like storming in a very loose sense. Play to Win actually did a really interesting video where they played the blue-black version of this commander, and you really got to see it do some like really cracked stuff, like really, really unique stuff, just like popping off at instant speed and stuff like that. And I know a lot of people are really focusing on the blue-black version of this deck, but alluding back to the thing we talked about, I don't know, too long ago at this point, I really think this is cool with the sacrifice
Street Urchin
background, the Street Urchin background.
Yeah.
Specifically because not only does it become like a really unique and maybe my favorite strength wise is it combo since Krakashima, just with the fact that like it lends itself so well to the storm mechanic. Like with what Gale does is just naturally very productive for a storm sense. Right. But the fact that it then also gets the ability to go infinite with Dockside, I just think there's a lot of play to that space. And the fact that on top of that, it also has this blue-black variant, which is just very much like, hey, Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual, they're all really good cards. Yawgmoth's Will, they're stupid. So all of these just generically extremely powerful cards that we get to play with in cEDH, being able to cast them multiple times and not be so all in as a deck like Lear, I think Gale's really cool. And I think that there is a lot of space to be explored with this card that has yet to be fully realized.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the biggest weakness of the card is that it is only ever blue-red or blue-black and never, unfortunately, Grixis, right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, right? That is for sure a thing. Yeah, without saying.
But yeah, that's fascinating. I definitely wasn't thinking about this card very much before you brought it up, Ian. Mm-hmm. So thank you for opening my eyes on the potential of this card.
Yeah.
Next card on our list is a character that will not go away. You're going to see it in cEDH a lot in a lot of different ways. And it's Minsc and Boo, Timeless Heroes. It is a legendary planeswalker that can be your commander that costs 2 colorless, a red, and a green, and it has 3 loyalty coming in. And it has a static ability that says, I have to,
get Boo.
When it enters the battlefield at the beginning of your upkeep, you may create Boo, a legendary 1/1 red hamster creature token with trample and haste. It has a +1 that says put 3 +1/+1 counters and up to 1 target creature with trample or haste. So obviously Boo. And then -2, sacrifice a creature. When you do, Minsc and Boo deals X damage to any target where X is that creature's power. If the sacrificed creature was a hamster, draw X cards. So what are you guys' thoughts on this card overall? Like,
I wish it was, Naya, like Minsc is supposed to be. I think that's probably the biggest strike against it. Is that like just straight red green Hulk is probably not good enough. And the fact that like the draw ability is on a minus is also a little bit rough.
And it has to be a hamster.
To draw the cards, you have to sacrifice Boo pretty much. I suppose you could sacrifice changelings, but like that's kind of too cute for me to ever imagine myself wanting to do it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it's really, it's cool in concept because like, it can draw cards. So it has that angle. It can make things bigger. So you've got like, this sort of aggressive bent to it. But the problem is that in those colors, you can't reliably slow down the game enough. So I think that you're not playing to the strengths of Hulk as a strategy or the potential strengths. Mm-hmm. You're not getting the additional speed that you would get if you added like black, for example. So you're kind of just always missing a crucial piece for the deck to really be as good as alternatives.
So last card on our list is also a commander, and I'm going to be honest, this is my favorite card from the set.
Reasonable.
By like a really long, like
by a wide margin.
A lot.
It's because it's a warrior, right?
Yes, it is a warrior. So Pongo, is this a Najeela card?
Of course. Yeah.
No, so before we get too deep into it, so Abdel, Adrian, Gorion's Wand is a 4/4 human warrior that costs 4 colorless and a white. And it says, when he enters the battlefield, exile any number of other non-land permanents you control until Abdel Adrian leaves the battlefield. Create a 1/1 white soldier creature token for each permanent exiled this way. And it also has choose background. So you can play this as your commander. But this is a white World Gorger Dragon, which is, Oh, and you know what the best part about this is it's a white World Gorger dragon that doesn't leave you wide open to just getting fucked in the ass. Like this card, it's beautiful. I love it. There's no world where you get screwed over by this card.
I think the biggest issue with your take is that World Gorger Dragon's niche and its strength has always been how efficiently and how quickly that combo can be pulled off, where you can just literally entomb and then animate dead, and you can do it so quickly and for so little mana and with so little development on the board. Right. You just need a land basically, and then in the decks that are built to really abuse World Gorger Dragon, that will typically be enough. Like with Evelyn, for example. This doesn't really do that, is kind of the issue. Where, this says for you to actually pull off that same combo, you need non-land permanents that make mana. And not just non-land permanents that make mana, they have to be non-summoning sick non-land permanents that make mana. So you can't use this with mana dorks. There's a lot of contexts where that is actually super relevant. For example, if you're layering with the Razaketh type of reanimation strategies, where you want to be playing mana dorks in that deck, right?
So where I see it being an upgrade over World Gorger Dragon is specifically in Timna Jeska,
right?
Because you're already playing a high density of those
the rocks, and you're mulliganing for rocks, but
you're mulliganing for those.
You still need a rock that makes colored mana, though.
Right, but the thing that is nice with this is even your fail state of I have a bunch of 1/1s contributes to the Timna plan, so you can still get back into the game even if you get got. And I think that's why I like it's slower on the curve than World Gorger Dragon is. So it's a lot more friendly to the ad nauseum strategy of Timna Jeska. That's why I see that and I get really excited, because I look at that and I go, oh, I'm much more willing to play this in Timna Jeska than I am World Gorger Dragon.
I think the explosivity of World Gorger Dragon is something that is really being overlooked here. Abdel is a much safer version of this effect, as Pongo kind of already stated. But the fact that so one of my first cEDH brews that started attracting attention was Kroxa. And one of the biggest appeals of that deck was that I could just go turn 1 command tower, turn 2 entomb, turn 1 entomb at end step, and then untap and animate dead. Right. And obviously you need another card in the
it's a detail. It's a detail.
We don't have to go into that specifically. It's details. And that speed was a very large factor in the appeal of World Gorger Dragon. Now, Abdel is a lot better in its floor case, right? But its ceiling case is significantly reduced.
Maybe, Ian, feel free to let me know if you agree or disagree with this sort of global assessment. I think Abdel is essentially not really replacing World Gorger Dragon for the decks that wanted World Gorger Dragon. That's not its primary function. It's almost more of an archetype creating card. It's going to empower different decks.
Wholehearted.
So,
agreement.
it is certainly going to be, a card that is played in cEDH like World Gorger Dragon, but I don't think that it is just a straight swap. I think what it is, it's empowering new decks.
I think, I think for anyone listening in the audience, I think what Pongo and I are taking critique on here is not necessarily the power level of this card or even its viability in a cEDH sense, but more so the idea that World Gorger is dead when compared to this card. I think it's comparing like apples and oranges, right? It's two very different things.
And that's fair. I am being a little bit like,
and it's like we're talking about Archivist, right? Like if you're comparing it to Opposition Agent, it smells like an opposition agent. It looks like an opposition agent, but if you taste the opposition agent, it's completely different flavor, right?
I will say I do stand by. I think this in Timna Jessica is just significantly better in a generic sense than World Gorger Dragon. I think it's probably much more friendly to what that deck is doing and is a much safer option that doesn't leave you just wide open to being got. And
I mean, like playing Abdel and like exiling a couple of your things and having a bunch of Timna attackers when the game gets desperate is way better than having this 7 mana thing that will just nuke your board. Right? Like in that strict sense, absolutely you're right.
Well, that about wraps things up for us here on the Mind Sculptors this week. Thank you so much for tuning in for this week's episode. If you liked this episode or any of our other episodes, please make sure to rate the show on whatever podcast platform you are listening on, or if you're listening on YouTube, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and tell us down in the comments what your favorite part of the show was or what your favorite card from Battle for Baldur's Gate is. What's your take on the set? Go ahead and let us know down there in the comments on YouTube. Also want to thank some of our top tier patrons: Justin, Adam Hamden, David Sneevely, Dionyches, Grady Goodenough, Jacob Turan, Jason Bialik, Matt Boehner, and Senior Coupon. If you too would like to support the show, you can head on over to patreon.com/The Mind Sculptors or check out the link in the description. Thank you again for joining us, and from all of us here at The Mind Sculptors, I'm Callahan, and we'll see you next time.